Hey there, party people. Jim here. Welcome to Admit 1, your movie ticket. The part 2 of Godzilla is taking a little bit longer to put together than I thought, and I didn't want to leave you guys hanging, so I was going to do a little episode here for you about a little movie that I was recently introduced to called Bloodbath, at least in one of its iterations. So one of my favorite aspects of film research is finding out when a production has gone awry and a producer or someone has come in, taken control away from the director and turned this movie into something completely different. One of the most famous ones is Superman 2. Richard Donner directed most of it, and then they decided they didn't like what was happening, or whatever the case may be. They took it away from him and released a completely different version. Another one that comes to mind is the Exorcist prequels. So there's Exorcist the beginning, and then there is Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist, and they are wildly different movies, following the same plot line, but just completely different. So I was talking about this on Twitter, and Mike Delaney from the Splathouse podcast popped in, and he was like, you need to check out Bloodbath. So I did, and it interested me, and of course here we are now. So a little bit of background on it. It is a Roger Corman production, and he bought the original rights to the movie before it was even made, I believe. And the original movie was called Operation Titian. So he bought it, decided it wasn't something that he could release here in the States, so he was going to Americanize it. So he hired some of the original actors from it, and actually Francis Ford Coppola was involved in a little bit of the story editing as well, with the hopes of turning it into something that he could release here. And I don't know the full story, so if you know the full story and you're hearing this and you're freaking out, just relax a little bit, it's okay. I'm just going to tell it the best I can. But the first, or I guess the first American version, but the second version of the film itself was called Portrait in Terror. About, it's a similar story, so I when I was watching it, they kind of, the Arrow release has them split up on 2 discs. There's Operation Titian and Portrait in Terror on one, and then Bloodbath and Track of the Vampire on the second disc. And I think it's split up because of timeline, but really, Operation Titian and Portrait in Terror kind of follow the same plotline. And then Bloodbath and Track of the Vampire kind of follow the same plotline. So I think you kind of have to look at them like that. So Operation Titian and Portrait in Terror are kind of these almost, well, Operation Titian is like a espionage kind of, almost a Ocean's 11 type thriller, I guess. More serious, of course. And then Portrait in Terror is a little bit more thriller-like, if you will. But even after Portrait in Terror, Roger Corman was like, I still don't like this. So in comes Jack Hill and Stephanie Rothman, who was hired by Corman to turn it into something completely different. There's a great documentary on the disc, and the guy narrating it says that kind of serial killers weren't in at the moment, so they turned it into a vampire tale, which is where Bloodbath comes in. And it is a completely different movie. A good majority of it is reshot, which is so weird. If you're gonna buy it, why not just make your own Bloodbath with the same people? There's a total of maybe 2 to 4 minutes of the original release in this. So to me, like, why wouldn't you just make Bloodbath on its own? But it's a different time. I don't know the full story or all of Roger Corman's history, so if you know more about it, let me know. I'd love to talk about it. Operation Titian is set in Europe, whereas Bloodbath is set in Venice Beach. And this one, again, Bloodbath and Track of the Vampire, similar stories. Track of the Vampire, which is the 4th version of the movie, is just a TV edit for Bloodbath. Bloodbath was deemed too short for television, so they added extra stuff into it, and not necessarily good stuff, to make it longer so it could run on TV. And this was done after the new scenes for Bloodbath were filmed, so there's an obvious disconnect from the 2 stories. So there's actually 5 versions that I could find of this movie. There's 2 versions of Operation Titian. There is Portrait in Terror, Bloodbath, and Track of the Vampire. Of Operation Titian and Portrait in Terror, Operation Titian is my favorite. It's a slow burn thriller. I rather liked it. I would watch it again for sure. This is not normally my cup of tea. Older black and white movies don't really interest me, but the story behind this got me into it, and then the movie itself pulled me into it. So I was pleasantly surprised by it, and I would definitely watch this one again. I don't think I'd watch Portrait of Terror again, but out of Bloodbath and Track of the Vampire, Bloodbath is obviously my favorite because Track of the Vampire is just the same movie with added fluff in it. And with Bloodbath, it's a quick 62 minutes, at least the version that Arrow could put together for the Blu-ray, because a lot of this shit is lost to time. They didn't take a lot of good care of this stuff, so they did the best they could. The transfer looks great. It's a great Blu-ray. It came with this cool book with some backstory to it, a nice fold-out poster that'll never go up, and that great documentary, which is like a video essay. I guess it was originally a 3-part article about a guy who absolutely loves the movie and the story behind it, much like I now do, and he dove into the complete history of it. So if you like wacky production tales, I recommend checking this one out, getting the Arrow Blu-ray with all the fancy extras on it. That documentary or video essay that I was talking about is called The Trouble with Titian Revisited, which is narrated and edited or directed by Tim Lucas, and it's just him now looking back at his 3-part article. So that alone really is worth the Blu-ray watch or purchase, whatever. So I hope you enjoyed this tiny little episode. Again, thanks to Mike Delaney for pointing me in the direction of this. I will see you guys in about 2 weeks with part 2 of Godzilla. So until next time, that is a wrap.